Hello, and welcome back for another week of Racism Color Outside the Lines. I'm Melissa D. White, joined with my amazing co hosts and dear friends, Amanda Macklin and Kate Good.
Hello.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome. Listen, we are now 5 weeks in. This is episode 5, and every week gets bigger and better because of each and every one of you. You've written us amazing letters of thanks just for creating space for the conversation. You have watched this show week after week with your families, your children, your coworkers, and you have shared your stories and the solutions. Listen, we don't profess to be the experts, but we understood the power of coming together and creating a safe place for radical candor and conversation and asking the questions on how we color outside the lines. This episode is particularly near and dear to my heart, as well as my co host, because education and systemic racism is a very real thing in our society. We're talking about this during a time when parents are very nervous for sending their kids back to school, not just because of the pandemic, but now there's heightened concern and awareness over our curriculum and the education of race and the history of that in our country. And as we looked for the experts on the topic, because we had so many questions ourselves, we came across our special guest for tonight, who is none other than Dr. Victor Rios. His story is one that deserves to be told worldwide, which it has with over 1.5 million views on his TED Talk. As we listen to him tonight and dig deeper to understand the implications of race and how systemic racism has affected the curriculum for our students, even down to the zoning for public schools, there's so many factors we have to consider. So we invite you to join us for this week's conversation on education and systemic racism. Welcome to Color Outside the Lines.
All right. Just like every week, we start with good news. So we're going to keep it short. We're not going to do our show stats tonight because we just feel that Dr. Rios is really, really important. So we're going to hurry things up and get to him. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the good news that I have. And I know last week we talked about Colin Kaepernick and the nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. But I just want to talk about him again. I have such admiration for him. But this week he announced a partnership deal with Disney. The partnership deal between Kaepernick's production arm, Raz Vision, and Walt Disney Company will focus on telling scripted and unscripted stories that explore race, social injustice, and the quest for equality. So I'm super excited about it. I've followed Colin Kaepernick through his career in the NFL and actually probably more so after. And I'm really excited. And I think this is a great partnership with Disney.
Well, listen, I tried to narrow mine down, but I have two that are really exciting for this week in terms of my good news. Actually, on July the 3rd, which was Crown Act Day, and I don't know if everyone knew that was in existence, but California was one of the first states to pass the Crown Act about rebuttaling or putting down discrimination against wearing natural hair in the workplace. So that hits definitely near and dear for me, wearing my natural hair and being accepted as still a professional, whether it's my afro or curls, and not being discriminated against for that reason. And so it is celebrated. And the goal is to get more states signing on to the Crown Act legislation to make that an act of discrimination if someone's not allowed to wear their hair in their natural state in the workplace. The other one is very particular to our collective industry of the multifamily residential housing industry. Many of you in our audience are friends of the industry. Some may not be. So if you hear us say the industry, that's typically what we're referring to. But I definitely appreciate the leadership of the National Apartment Association to put together webinars and education on solutions to the problem or issues of racism, even within residential housing. And so the first free webinar will kick off on next Thursday, a week from today, July 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern. You can go to the NAA website and I'll be joined with just some amazing industry icons, heavy hitters, and experts on not only diversity and inclusion, but building teams. I'll be joined by Jacora Connor, who you've seen here on our very own Color Outside the Lines. Also, Ramel Anakin, who is an expert on diversity and inclusion. And also, former chair of the NAA board, Alex Jackie, who has been a mentor to me in the industry and is a huge advocate of diversity and inclusion through the scholarship she offers to add diversity to our industry. So I just wanted to shout out NAA for seeing the importance of setting a standard on the national level so we have a compass and some type of framework to have these conversations on the affiliate and local level.
Wow, I'm celebrating that. That's great. Good news indeed. And before I share my good news, I'm just going to give you a moment of honesty, Melissa. I didn't know that there are workplaces where you wouldn't be able to have your natural hair. I'm shocked. I'm blown away as somebody who loves your hair. I just can't believe that. Wow. This just tells me once again why we do this, why we're having this conversation, while we're sharing, why we're opening up eyes, doors, ears, mouths, why we're doing this. I'm so internally grateful to both of you for doing this and bringing me along. This has been an incredible journey. The good news that I want to share, I have to say just a tiny little story that goes with it. When we added this good news segment, I reached out to some of the leaders that I know in our industry. And one of them that I thought I'd hear right back from, I didn't hear anything from him. And then yesterday, or was it today? I'm not sure. I got an email from him and he apologized for not getting back to me, but he said, Kate, your email kind of shook me up a little bit. And the reason is because when you received the email, he said, you know what? We're not doing enough. We should be doing more. So we didn't really have anything to report at the time, but because of this conversation, because of this platform that we've created, he went to his company and they were having a weekly Zoom call to kind of keep everybody connected through all the ebbs and flows and changes and everything going on. And he talked to one particular person in the company and said, I think that we should open up a conversation with our team members and just ask them, how do they feel like they're being treated at our company? Does everyone feel like they're being treated fairly? Have we created that environment that we think we have or that we've written about in our mission statement? In other words, does it really exist? And so he took the initiative to call some of his coworkers who would be minorities in the company and ask that question. And as you can imagine, some were very afraid to answer right away. And then he knew it. He knew when they were afraid to answer that they didn't think they were being treated fairly or that they had some bad experiences. And so with patience and love, he got them to open up. And he did have one team member that said, if you talk about it on the company call, I will be the first one to speak up, which was a very brave step for that person. And as a result, his email just went on and on and on with the domino effect of people speaking up, speaking out, and now some serious changes that they're going to make to really put teeth behind their mission for diversity and inclusion and for creating this environment of safe conversation for everybody. So I'm just eternally surprised and grateful and joyful for what our little podcast is doing. So that was great news to share.
That is phenomenal news. And Kate, I couldn't agree more that the more these stories roll in about people being quite vulnerable and transparent that I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. And I respect leaders that say, hey, let me sit with it. Let me say I don't know and find the help. And I think that's the bravest thing that any leader could ever do. So kudos to them. Yep. So ladies, are we ready to hear from Dr. Victor Rios?
Yes. I just wanted to say really quickly, sorry, just like Melissa said, a lot of people have asked me because our reach has become so much bigger than multifamily.
Yes.
And I did have somebody text this week and say, when you say in the industry, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, you don't know where I thought everybody knew who I was. So I guess I'm not as famous as I thought. So one of the things that has happened is a number of educators, a number of parents have started watching this show, watching with their children, saying, what can I do? How can I understand better? I think our white privilege episode woke a lot of people up. And Melissa, being a mentor and educator herself, I'm like, girl, I guess we got to cover this, right? I'm not an expert. None of us are experts. You have a lot more experience, Melissa, than I do. But I am a concerned parent. I'm a very concerned parent, especially in the climate that we have currently in my school district where my son is. And so we said, okay, we're going to take it on. I don't know what to do. I'm positive Dr. Rios has 1.6 million views now because I've watched his TED Talk like 100,000 times. And I'm excited. And I think a little bit of context, Melissa, and what you do is going to help, because a lot of us know you from the industry, the multifamily world, but you do so much more than that. So if you can give us a little bit of context about your nonprofit. We just had the discussion with Dr. Rios on how it started. I never knew how it started. If you can just give Cliff Notes version about that before we introduce Dr. Rios, because I know once he gets on the screen, I'm going to fangirl and we're going to forget that.
I got you. Well, I greatly appreciate you all giving just a few minutes to recognize the work that's done outside of multifamily. I'm exceptionally passionate about what we do in the residential property management space. And I've been a trainer in the industry for years. I'm an advocate for leasing and leasing teams and what they do on the front line of our work, which means that honestly, I'm an advocate for people to be heard. And so Righting Our Wrongs Incorporated, which is my nonprofit organization, meaning some may or may not know about it. That's my life outside of work. But it is a life's work and a calling. And it came from a place of a very unfortunate tragedy with the death, the killing of Michael Brown. And when that occurred, it was very much like even the impact that was felt recently with the killing of George Floyd, where it was a shock, because now we're seeing it on social media. You're seeing, the body in the street and things like that. And at the time, it was birthed from a place of literally, I grieved as if he was my brother or my cousin or just a relative in my family. And I began to write. And as I wrote, I thought of this generation of young people who were unlike us. We didn't grow up seeing those images in the news of people who look like us in the street dying or being killed. And so I began to write letters of affirmation and affirmation cards for young people to know that they have a voice. And it just simply says, I would use my voice to impact change in my community, and letting them know that although they're not of age to vote, that they do have a voice and their voice matters. And so I just felt compelled and led to print up these cards, these affirmation cards. And I just drove around the city of Atlanta, dropping off cards at every school I passed. And so like a couple of weeks into it, I started getting phone calls from schools that said, hey, we got these cards floating around our school. We want you to come speak. And I was like, you want me to what? And so what I learned through that experience, and I'm an everyday citizen, like I was just a concerned person that I thought about the children in my family. I mean, I'm an auntie, I'm a godmom, but I also I'm an advocate for the youth voice, because they know and see so much more than we ever can imagine, especially in today's time. And so the mission of Righting Our Wrongs, affectionately called WOW, is empowering youth to activate their voice through writing and speech for anti-bullying and social justice. And I know Dr. Rios will talk more about the curriculums and the systemic things that occurs, but they're not taught civics. They're not taught about our current government system and legislation, and how to be an active, engaged citizen, or how to write to their local officials. I mean, we just had primary elections. And so to see the children in our program know who their officials are, probably more than their parents, and they're writing about things that concern them. They learn how to speak and how to be a page at the Capitol and to serve their legislator. And that's one of the most powerful gifts you can give to them as they age. And so being connected to Dr. Rios and watching his video, it struck home for me, and particularly the part about the juvenile justice system, because through WOW, we were able to connect with the Georgia Department of Juvenile Justice and serve young people who are in juvenile detention, who there's let's just say it, like, people don't think there's a real, school to prison pipeline, but it is very real. There are some systemic implications of it. I've seen it firsthand. I never thought I would be walking the halls of juvenile detention centers and hearing their stories. I mean, they're children. I know that some of them may have committed acts of crime, and it does sound unthinkable, but at the essence of it, it's a child that's from a family that had a story. And so I'm going to show a clip here of Dr. Rios sharing a little bit of his story, and we're going to hear from none other than Dr. Victor Rios.
For over a decade, I have studied young people that have been pushed out of school, so-called dropouts. As they end up failed by the education system, they're on the streets where they're vulnerable to violence, police harassment, police brutality, and incarceration. I follow these young people for years at a time across institutional settings to try to understand what some of us call the school to prison pipeline. When you look at a picture like this of young people who are in my study, you might see trouble. I mean, one of the boys has a bottle of liquor in his hand. He's 14 years old, and it's a school day. Other people, when they see this picture, might see gangs, thugs, delinquents, criminals. But I see it different. I see these young people through a perspective that looks at the assets that they bring to the education system.
So with that, I bring to you none other than Dr. Victor Rios. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Miles of applause.
Very honored. Very honored to be here. Very happy. Y'all got me hyped up in this little pre-text conversation. I'm ready to go. Let's do this.
Let's do this. Well, let me tell our audience more about who you are. Dr. Rios is an associate dean of social sciences and a professor of sociology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He received his PhD in comparative ethics studies at the University of California, Berkeley in 2005. Professor Rios has worked with local school districts to develop programs and curricula aimed at improving the quality of interactions between authority figures and youth. Using his personal experience of living in the streets, dropping out of school, and being incarcerated as a juvenile, among with his research findings, he has developed interventions for marginalized students aimed at promoting personal transformation and civic engagement. These programs have been implemented in Los Angeles, California, and Watts, juvenile detention facilities, and alternative high schools. He's the author of 6 books, including My Teacher Believes in Me, The Educator's Guide to At Promise Students, Street Life, Poverty, Gangs, and a PhD in Punished, Policing the Lives of Black and Latino Boys. Dr. Rios has been featured in the Chronicle of Higher Education, TED Talks, which, as Amanda said, probably has 1.6 million now, as many times as we have watched it, as well as the Oprah Winfrey Network, Premier Impacto, and the National Public Radio. He's had the honor of meeting President Obama and advising his administration on gun violence and policing. His TED Talk, Help for Kids in the Education System, which we just showed a short clip of it. We highly encourage you to watch the entire thing. Watch it with your kids and your family and have a discussion. Watch his TED Talk, which has garnered, as I said, 1.5 million views. He's the subject of the documentary film Pushouts, which will show the trailer later on in our broadcast this evening. Dr. Rios conducts keynote addresses and professional development sessions for school teachers, staff, and administrators. Dr. Rios, we're honored to have you and welcome to Color Outside the Lines.
Thank you. Thank you. Very honored to be here. And it's a powerful conversation. I just want to honor the work that you're doing as volunteers, really bringing justice and conversations about justice to America. You know, we need the healing and we need the caring, and you're bringing it. And thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you. I honor you too. So I'm gonna jump right in. I tell you, it was you find humor in the fact that we were so excited about you that Amanda and I were up at like 4 in the morning texting about this TED talk. It's like, are you watching this? Oh my gosh. And we're like collaborating on questions because we were just that excited from a personal place of the work you do. And the immediate thing that stood out to me is the way you're changing the narrative through language in terms of shifting at risk to at promise. Tell us more about what that means of at risk to at promise and why it's important to phrase it that way.
Yeah, I grew up in an environment, a lot of poverty. I didn't have a father growing up. He abandoned me before I was even born. I grew up in Oakland, California. During the time, it was like the crack epidemic. My mom was on welfare. We would wait in line when I was a little kid to try to get housing and to get support from social services. And all they would give us was a big block of yellow cheese, government cheese, and we would go home and make quesadillas with that cheese. I guess when life gives you cheese, make quesadillas, right? And life was rough, and we lived in this apartment complex that should have been condemned. We had a landlord that would not get rid of the rats. We had big rats, and one day, my little cousin, I was growing up in this environment, and my little cousin, he was a baby. He was sleeping in his crib, middle of the night, and the rats crawled on his crib and began to chew his face up, chew his lips, gums, cheeks. By the time mom got up and realized what was going on, you know, um, he was just in a pool of blood, and he ended up in the hospital. And I'm growing up in this environment, and I'm thinking like, this is normal life. This is reality. This is what I'm supposed to expect from life. For people to exploit us, for people to not give us good living conditions, for us to not have opportunities. And so I just started to lose hope. I became hopeless. I thought that I wasn't going to make it anywhere in life. And I thought I was a loser, that I was a risk to society. So as a teenager, I started to be a risk. I started to steal cars. I started to end up in juvie. I started to fight. I started to even get into drugs. And that just label continued to perpetuate itself. And I ended up thinking to myself, well, I'm always just going to be a risk to society, and I'm okay with it, right? I'm at peace with that. So I'm either going to end up in prison or dead. And the reason that I always felt like I was a risk was, of course, my environment, but also my education, my schooling. From a young age, I was told in school that I was, a no good student, that I was dumb, stupid. These are all words coming from teachers. In third grade, I had a teacher that started yelling at me in class and kicked me out. And the reason she was yelling at me and kicking me out of class is because I wouldn't read a word that she wrote on the board. And the reason is I couldn't see the word because I needed glasses. And she thought I was being defiant. She thought I was being a tough guy and too cool for school. But the only issue that I had going on was that I couldn't see, and that my glasses were not there because I didn't get glasses until I was a teenager, till I was 15 years old. And so it was a health condition that the system thought was a criminal condition. Like, you're just a criminal, delinquent, defiant kid. And for me, it was like, no, I just don't even realize it, but I need glasses. That's why I'm not reading the word on the board. So ever since third grade, I just looked down at the system. The system looked down at me. And that's the battle that a lot of young people out there end up getting into with schools and with police. Like, you're the enemy. I'm your enemy. I'm a risk. You're a risk. We're never going to get along. And that's the iceberg, right? That's when we see the unfortunate killings of unarmed Black men and increasingly women and also Latinx populations. You realize, like, oh, because no one really, has an understanding of each other. There's just a fear of each other that's going on, and it labeled a risk. And so for me, the first step in really changing our conversations and really changing our society is to start to see the assets that people bring that come from places that we might look down upon. You know, some people look down upon poor people. Well, poor people find ways to make do, to make a living, to hustle, to struggle, to survive. How can we take those familial relationships that poor people develop and teaching the children of these individuals hone in on the positive assets? Hey, you've been taught to hustle. Let me show you another way of hustling. Let me show you how to hustle the school system. Let me show you how to hustle the professional world. Let me show you how to make a living. Because let's face it, those of you in the industry, those of you professionals out there, you know that this whole world, this corporate world, even the nonprofit world, is one big hustle, right? We're all hustling to raise money. We're all hustling to make money. We're all hustling to get more clients.
Mhm.
Why can't we be teaching these young people how to hustle in the real world if the real world is continually built upon one big hustle, right? And so bringing those hustling skills that they learn and teaching them how to do it in a legal and, of course, way that has some character allows us to then help improve their conditions.
That's so powerful. And you said just changing the perspective, like how you hustle. You talk about the teachers who had an impact, particularly Miss Russ, and how she took the initiative. I don't want to give it away because you guys have to watch this for yourself. But the part where she took an interest in you, and you said like she just kind of knew you, like she just would know the situation, but she went beyond that. Do you stay in touch with Miss Russ, and you want to maybe share a little bit with our audience about the impact that she made?
Oh yeah. So like I said, I was in and out of juvie, not caring. I was getting prepared for prison. Really, talk about a school to prison pipeline. In the documentary, if you go to thepushouts.com, you'll see a clip of the documentary where there's a image of me in high school that a photo crew happened to capture, and it's a video of me getting dragged away in a hallway by a cop, by a police officer, because I was in a gang fight. I ended up getting expelled from school because there was zero tolerance policies against fights and gang fights. And so in that moment, when this officer drags me away, right, you see a depiction of a brown man, a young man, being in the situation where he's considered this thug that's not going to amount to anything. And that's the video clip that shows on national TV, on PBS, on Frontline about me. And at the time, I was a kid and I didn't understand why I would be criminalized in such a way, even though I was a victim in that moment. A big group of guys were trying to beat me up. But I knew I had to get revenge on the system, that I had to prove the system wrong. So even though I came out on national TV as this gang thug, 20 years later, I had become this professor and author that was contributing to society. And so what happens is that while I'm in high school and trying to figure out my life and dropped out and deciding if getting back in or not, my best friend, we were both 15, ends up being killed and on the streets. And I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to turn to. There was only one person in my life that had told me she would be there for me. And that was my teacher, Miss Russ. And Miss Russ, she was the kind of teacher that was always in your business. She was the kind of teacher that was always trying to figure out where you were and really always trying to talk to you about your future. But at the moment, you didn't really appreciate what she had to say. And so I would always ignore her. And I remember in that moment looking for someone to support me during this difficult time after my friend passes away. And I go to school, even though I hadn't been there in weeks. I'm walking down the hallway and the teacher comes out. She's looking for me. And she comes out and she sees me and she says, Victor, I heard what happened. Are you okay? And I'm trying to be a tough guy. And I'm trying, this passing hour, hundreds of kids are walking through the hallway and I'm just trying to be tough. And yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay, Miss Russ. And she looked at me. She goes, I know you're not okay. She taps me on the shoulder. And right when this lady taps me on my shoulder, all my pain, all my fear, all my anger begins to grow. And I began to cry like this little kid in front of the whole school. So here's this tough gangster crying in front of the whole school. And you know what this teacher did? She opens her arms up. She gives me a hug. She says, Victor, I'm here for you. You're ready to change your life around. I'll be here for you, but you have to do the work. You see, what's happening in our society is that we're too quick to throw away our kids that are labeled failures. We're too quick to just say, oh, this kid won't listen, get rid of them. No, we don't want them in school. So where do they end up? They end up in the system, in the juvenile justice system. They end up having negative interactions with police officers that are unnecessary interactions out there on the streets. And they end up getting in trouble, maybe harassed, maybe brutalized. Unfortunately, for some, even killed. And so what we have to do is change these understandings of these young people just the same way like my teacher did. She understood me differently. She saw the assets that my community brought and she recognized them. She's like, look at your family, your family of immigrants. Your mom works so hard, your whole community works hard. And why don't you bring that hard work into the education system? And do it for your friend that passed away, do it for your community, do it for your family. One thing she knew coming from poverty, sometimes, when poor people, what they do is they build a familial culture. It's because they have to back each other up. So they have extended family networks. And so coming from a familial culture for me meant when you tell me, hey, why don't you go to school and you'll make it for yourself? I'm like, nah, that's not for me. But if you say to me, why don't you go to school and go to college and get a degree? And when you graduate, that's not just for you, that's for your family, your community, to make this world a better place. You add a civic engagement component, and all of a sudden, this kid that grows up in poverty is like, absolutely, sign me up. You know why? Because I want to save my community. I want to help my community. I want to support my community. And that's kind of the predicament we're in, where we as a system, both in education and then sometimes even in law enforcement, don't really understand how to communicate and culturally translate for some of these young people that, again, are coming maybe from poor areas where we just don't know how to talk in their language, if you will.
So you said that your teacher hero said she would be there for you when you were ready, when you had to make the decision and you were ready. And when you made that decision and you were to the point that you were ready, you wanted to make those changes, how was the school there for you? Because I think that would be a really good information for those of us that want to be there for people.
Well, I have to say that education today, just the same case with my teacher back then. She would have a philosophical battle with other educators. And the philosophical battle was essentially, hey, you know what? These kids are not going to make it. We don't have a lot of resources. Let's just focus on the ones that are going to make it. Right? And she would say, no, no, no. We have to treat them all as if they're going to make it. We can't be the ones to determine who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. We got to give them all consistent treatment. What my teacher did back then is that she convinced the school that kids like me were getting in trouble, mostly African American and Latino males at the time she was mentoring, that we needed second, third, fourth chances. And that she explained to our educators that kids like me were like oysters. We only open up when we're ready. And yet the school was so frustrated because they had tried. They had given us counselors and programs and therapists and teachers, and we're not buying into your stuff. And it's easy to get frustrated. You're trying so hard, but you have to be consistent. Like my teacher, she was consistent. So she convinced other teachers in the school to be consistent, to show me that positive emotional support. And that's when the school felt like a place that I belonged. And it wasn't until my junior year of high school that it felt like I belonged in school. That's when I started to change. That's when I started to say, hey, maybe I can make it. And that's when I started to explore the opportunity of college even.
Go
ahead.
sorry. Melissa and I talked about this a little earlier. One of the things that I said, or that I've thought a lot about, is you're one teacher away. And that's one teacher away from a bad experience or one teacher away from a good experience. In second grade, my son, 2 weeks in, was told he wasn't going to make it. And I'm like, second grade? Oh my gosh, but we've taught our children to trust adults. They're the authority, follow their direction. And 2 weeks into second grade, he was told, you're never going to make it out of second grade. Last year, he was told that something he did was dumb or stupid. I forget what it was, dumb or stupid. And my son took everything wonderful that teacher probably said all year, went out the window when she told him that what he said or did was stupid. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that at such a young age in school, you are looking to your teachers. So if you're consistently being told you're at risk, you're a problem in the classroom, you're being taken out into the hall every day, I don't think people or teachers understand what that does to a child. Now, fortunately, you had a Mrs. Russ. I'm looking for some Mrs. Russes in our school district right now.
They're
But
out there.
people need to realize you're one teacher away, and that can make it or break it for you.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Sometimes for whatever we don't know why some teachers can be so mean. I've done studies where I go to middle schools and I hear teachers tell a little sixth grade African American boy, you have a prison cell waiting for you when you grow up. I go to high schools where I hear teachers yell in their face, to students of all races, you're a loser, you're never going to amount to anything. That's today, right? That's not 20, 30, 40. That's today. And you hear students report that all the time. So just the same way there's teachers that we don't know why they're behaving in that way. Maybe they're burnt out. Maybe they have personal issues. Maybe they're just old school. They always say, oh, I'm just old school. That old school stuff doesn't work. And we need new school. New school is to be anti-racist. New school is to have some social justice literacy. New school is to be social, emotional development based. New school is to provide students that civic engagement opportunity. And new school is to be culturally responsive. Otherwise, we're just repeating systems that are based on oppression, and we continue to perpetuate the same cycle. Oh, I'm colorblind. I just teach all the students. That's not true. I've done studies, people have done studies where you could see good white teachers that are good people and actually are great educators with good practices. And then the kids of color come into the classroom and they do this. And then people are like, how do you know they're implicitly biased? Oh, I study body language. I'm observing. I'm taking notes. And when you do this and a Mexican American student walks into your class and you're doing this, but then when the white students walk in, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Mm-hmm. That in itself, those subtleties tell you a lot. So we even have to almost change the way that we're programmed as human beings to respond to different races of folks, because we've been taught that stuff that they carry with them is no good. Their culture, the background, their neighborhood, their community, their air, that stuff is not good enough in our society, and they have to somehow assimilate. And instead of assimilation, we should be thinking of incorporation, right? A world where many worlds exist.
So when it comes to just changing what that looks like in terms of educators, first making them aware of how they're receiving or even rejecting students in their body language, how can we, or how do you rather start that level of awareness? How do you give the tools to not only educators, because there are some parents too, some of these dialogues transfer over into the home. There's not always the positive affirmation or, confirming to that child who they are when they leave school, that there's an environment they enter into at home. How do you then address that and giving parents and educators a lesson on how to better relate to that student while helping them in the process of opening up?
Humanizing our students is number one. Like, sometimes educators have If you're elementary, you got 30 kids and they all got 30 problems. It's like, whoa, that's a lot. Or your high school teacher, they got 120 kids. How am I going to, right now, remote learning, how am I going to check on every single kid? But if educators are more humanly connected to their students, and unfortunately, teaching to the test, what it does is it creates a brick wall between the educator and the student. Oh, I'm here to teach you a subject. My teacher would always say, I don't teach subjects, I teach students. She was a computer science teacher. And even then, she stepped out of her STEM world and brought us social emotional learning before she even taught us any programming. I mean, she taught all these gangsters and thugs, and some of the kids I came up with in high school were dope dealers, you know, all of us to program and hack computers early on, and she did it first by connecting with us emotionally. Then she would get us on the computers, you know. And I'm not gonna lie, some of us were thinking like, how can we hack a bank or how can we do all these, And we were high school teenagers.
Yeah.
But then she's like, no, 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 you don't want to hack a bank. What you want to do is go be president of a bank. That was her style. Like, first, let me get you in there and learn the system, and
Mhm.
then teach you how to use the system really against itself, because the system was set up to not hire people like me, right? Even the university system, I'm an associate dean and professor, even today in liberal California, we have a tiny number of faculty of color in the University of California system, tiny, tiny number of African American administrators in the University of California system. It is egregious for a state and system that considers itself so progressive and liberal. It's nonsense in terms of what it's been rejecting, in a racist way, populations that could be representing the state of California, but they're not doing it. And they're not willing to acknowledge their racism, because why? They're so progressive. That's why. So this isn't a right or left, progressive, liberal, conservative. No, this is across the board. All of us need to pick up on how to really eradicate the injustice that's embedded in every single one of us and that we perpetuate. And the way to do it, again, I mentioned this idea of social justice literacy earlier. And it's just these conversations right here are making people literate in social justice. So one of you brought up earlier that you had a conversation on white privilege. I mean, for some people, it must have been like, I've never heard of this. Wow, this is enlightening, right? And you brought it to them, right? And people were willing to listen. That's what I mean by social justice literacy. It's not just education systems that are going to bring about an awareness. It's all of us in our society that are going to do so.
Another great show that we had was with Dr. Batalora, and she came on and really shared an amazing history lesson of our own country, and helped us understand how our country was really built in a racist way. It was really built with laws that benefited white people and continue today in many respects. And I know for me, and Amanda shared this too, we learned a lot about our history that we didn't know. And I wanted to ask you how you feel about curriculum selection today, and sharing that history and how it impacts kids.
Yeah, no, that's a good, a really, really great point. I mean, listen, kids are still learning overwhelmingly. When you learn American history, 80% of it is still um, white men that contributed to the making of the society. And you look at the textbooks, 80% of it is white men that contributed to the making of. So when you're a little girl of color and you're like, oh, everyone tells me I'm American, but America was built by these people that are totally different than me. I've never, seen in my family someone look like that. Then it's like a disconnect from who you're supposed to be. It's detachment from being American, right? It's a purposeful violation of our Americanness as multi-ethnic population. So like, instead of teaching us just about one group that contributed to the greatness of our society, teach us about the Native American people that actually were the first ones to develop, say, the platform for our US Constitution. The Iroquois people were the ones that developed that platform, but we don't know that. From day one, American history, day one, boom. Oh, by the way, we brought slaves and they made contributions. They actually built, most of the South and even DC. Why don't we learn about that? Instead we learn about the white man that stepped on them, and that history should be counterbalanced, right? We're learning about George Washington, the good things he did, and also the bad things he did. Why? Because all of us do good things and bad things, hopefully not as egregious as owning slaves, but some of us, get caught up in moral predicaments, and we need to learn from history so it doesn't repeat itself. So absolutely, we need a multicultural understanding of our America. People are like, oh, well, America wasn't multicultural until immigrants came. Well, maybe they're right, because the first immigrants were the European immigrants that then, brought various cultures with them. But even within the America before the Europeans landed, Native Americans were multicultural. So multiculturalism, understandings across the board, knowing our history in a very complex way is absolutely crucial. And so just changing that framework. I know in California, a law just passed mandating that ethnic studies be taken for a high school student graduates. So that's something to consider in other local districts, a mandated ethnic studies curriculum, multicultural studies. I'm calling it social justice literacy, and understanding, because why social justice literacy? We get to learn about our LGBTQ plus population. We get to learn about struggles of women. We get in history. We get to learn about toxic masculinity. We get to learn about all these injustices that also go beyond race. So it's crucial that we learn a history that is accurate, but it just includes more populations that have been there from day one of the making of this country.
Can you speak more to, from your knowledge or even maybe your contribution in your role, to how the curriculum is now shifting, or even suggestions, not only in the school system, but to parents who are now tasked with teaching their kids at home? Can you speak to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's beautiful books out there. Some of the most recent ones is like, there's a book called "How to Be an Anti-Racist," right? And that's very practical, like instructions on how to be anti-racist. It's a beautiful book. I know it's making the rounds. Then there's a book that's uh, called a Different Mirror and the Making of Multicultural America. And that one's by Ronald Takaki, A Different Mirror, the Making of Multicultural America. And that book, it's a thick history book, but what that book does, it walks you through every single racial ethnic group, from the struggles of Jewish women in the factory in New York City burning down when they were in sweatshops, and they are the ones that spit the struggles for unions, and even the people that brought us the weekend, right? Unions brought us the weekends. Well, it was the Jewish women of New York City when that building burns down that very few people know about. The labor struggles are what brought about what we now know as the weekend, and the and labor conditions being improved, right? All these populations are talked about in this one book. It's a beautiful book. Again, it's called A Different Mirror, The Making of Multicultural America by Ronald Takaki. And it really gives you a sense of history that is, this is a true Berkeley historian that is a true scholar and well documented, but it gives you a true understanding of our multicultural history. And those are two books I recommend. And then along the way, there's local histories, local communities. Like there's places that have monuments that people are like, why are they taking these monuments down? Learning those histories of why, and the people, call them the ghosts. The ghosts of those monuments. Who are the ghosts? Those are the people that were oppressed. Those are the people that were invisibilized. The women in the backdrop, the Native Americans, the African Americans. Like those ghosts, their stories need to come out so they're no longer ghosts.
Let's speak to that about when you say the ghosts. Those are the untold stories. So, how are you partnering with your colleagues who are Black educators on inserting the stories of these ghosts so that there's a new education for youth so that they can equate to those stories their current day struggle, because the struggle is still here. We see our very youth today that we're talking about taken to the streets in protest. So how are you guiding students in that and with your comrades who are Black and brown educators?
Yeah, no, there's a few ways we're doing that. One is to just make sure we're reading the most recent literature on updating the historical record, making sure we're inclusive of different perspectives. And another way is in our research projects. So, um, when in 2014, when Mike Brown was killed, he was a young black male that was on his way to college, and he was hanging out in front of his apartment complex, and he was unarmed, and a police officer shot him and killed him, shot him in the back and killed him. His name was Mike Brown. 2014, Ferguson, Missouri, a group of primarily Black criminologists and myself got together. They're all professors or graduate students at different institutions. And we went to Ferguson, Missouri, and we just wanted to see history in the making. This is before the term Black Lives Matter was even coined. This is the movement that kind of brought about Black Lives Matter as a national, international movement. And we're interviewing these young people, and I met this young man, and he had a tattoo right here, and he was on the street corner. He was telling me stories about how I've been on the street corner, and then he heard about Mike Brown being killed, and so he went to the site and saw, what was left there from what happened to Mike Brown, and he was furious. So he just started to like organize on his own, and he started with just signs, and then he started camping out in street corners, protesting with those signs on his own, all by himself. And then people started following him. And then one day he's telling a story that one day he's over there walking with a sign on the street, marching. And by the way, the media and politicians, I called a lot of these protesters, I call them looters and rioters, right? Violent people. But most of them, I was there watching, right? As a researcher and observer, most of them were peacefully protesting. And so he's peacefully protesting with a sign, 19-year-old young man. And all of a sudden his brother says to him, "Hey, did you look behind you?" And he's like, "No." So he looks behind him, and thousands of people are following him. He goes, "You know what you're doing?" He's like, "What?" He's like, "You're leading a movement. You're leading a protest civil rights movement." And then Dante was his name. Dante says, "Oh, like Malcolm X? Like Martin Luther King? Yeah, man, like Malcolm X, Martin, what?" And he says he got teary eyed. He's like, "Let's do this." And what I'm trying to say here, right, is that we have civil rights leaders out there on the streets today, but we fail to acknowledge them, we fail to engage with them, and we fail to help give them opportunities to get jobs and to get an education. And that's why I appreciate that idea, Melissa, of civic engagement, because when these young people get civically engaged, they're like Dante, let's do this. Like, I'm a leader. I didn't even know I was a leader, right? Because we're looking at history for leaders, but our leaders are right here, and they're the youth. They're the future. We see them protesting, and even today, they're called what? Rioters, where they're called looters, but most of them are peacefully protesting, just trying to bring about change. And that's the collaborations we have going, where we want to document the history in the making, because a lot of times we really understand history in 10, 20 years later. And so we want to know what's going on now. How are young people shaping our world today?
Dr. Rios, when you were growing up, did you have heroes?
Yeah, I mean, there were non-conventional heroes. I have to say, there's because I came up in Oakland, California. That's where the Black Panther Party was created, and the Black Panther Party was a group of black individuals in the 1960s that got together and fought against police violence, and eventually brought about free breakfast programs. The first free breakfast programs for children in this country were from a struggle that the Black Panthers had. People in the history books see them as having, with guns in their hands and protesting, being radical, but no one really talks about how brought breakfast programs to communities across the nation now. And now it's a given. Like, you get free breakfast for most, children if you go to public school and you have a need. So, all to say that I came up in these neighborhoods, in this neighborhood called the Lower Bottom West Oakland, and then in this other neighborhood in East Oakland, where a lot of Black Panthers, former Black Panthers, had already kind of been gone through the system, because a lot of times they got locked up and they ended up addicted to drugs, some of them, and they were the ones that were my mentors. But as a kid, I didn't know that they had been involved in these struggles. I just knew them as some guy in the neighborhood that hung out on a street corner, and those guys would mentor me, they would guide me, and they would protect me when people bully me. And so those were my heroes, is what I'm trying to say. And so a lot of people knew them as drug addicts or dealers, or just people on the street. And for me, were the people that were teaching me the ropes. They were the people that were teaching me how to hustle. They were the people that were teaching me how to survive in this violent environment, and they would protect me. So my heroes at the time as a child were really people in the neighborhood that society saw as criminals, but they were finding ways to protect our community despite the fact that they had some, of course, personal issues going on. And so I tell this story because there are heroes in our communities that our society might see as thugs, criminals, delinquents, and in reality, they're finding ways to make our communities safer and make our communities better. And if we were to resource them, provide them some supports, I mean, for goodness sake, George Floyd, he wanted to get cigarettes and used, allegedly, we don't even know the full story, a fake $20 bill. I mean, what if he had the economic opportunity to be able to afford his cigarettes? I mean, would we even be having this discussion, right? This boils down to economics. So we disinvested in the Black community from day one of the making of this country, and how we need to reinvest in it so that those economic opportunities are there.
Yeah, that was a powerful statement. This all boils down to economics. There's so much we can unpack there, Dr. Rios, in terms of the economic implications, why public schools are underfunded, why there's a difference in curriculum and resources and even salaries among teachers, depending on where they are. I mean, there's so many things. Can you, as we wrap up here, would you like to share maybe just your favorite success story that you've seen? I know of one from the TED Talk, but just some successes of the work, so we can just see some hopeful examples, or even maybe that we can model in our individual communities.
Mentoring is number one. Again, in the documentary, the pushouts, you could find it if you just do a search for thepushouts.com. You'll see the stories of different young people. In one of the cases, well, in that program, what we did is we just brought like people in the community that wanted to mentor these kids. They had all dropped out of school. And the first thing we did was say, well, they didn't drop out. They got pushed out by the system. And that's why that's the title of the film. Let's treat them as pushouts. The system pushed them out. Let's bring them back in. Let's help them finish their high school diploma and get them to community college. And that's what we did. And the people I went to recruit were all volunteers. We have a individual by the name of Love Jefferson, former NFL football player, lives in LA. I ran into him at a conference once. We were both kind of keynoting, speaking in Long Beach, and I said, "Hey, you want to collaborate?" He's like, "Yeah, what do you got?" I said, "All mentoring. It's all volunteer. I got no money for it, but we want to help these 40 kids." He's like, "Let's do it. Let's do it." And he shows up. He's like a big teddy bear. He's doing ropes courses and icebreakers with the students, and then we have other individuals that are wanting to mentor, just everyday people. The only way we were able to help change some of the lives of these young people that had dropped out of school and get them back into school was through everyday citizens saying, "Okay, I'm down to mentor some kids in Watts in LA. I'm down to be there. I've never worked with kids, but I'll be. What do you need? Oh, can you bring, $5 worth of oranges this morning so we can feed them more? Sure. Oh, can you run an activity with them? Okay. All right. Can you tell your life story for the ones that have been through a lot of stuff and got their college degree? Okay, I'll tell them my life story. Okay, can you run this writing activity? Sure, not a problem. The mentoring, if we're out there reaching out to these young people, especially today when they're locked in their homes during quarantine, or they're trying to figure out what to do, and we're just there volunteering, asking how we could be there to support young people in our local community, that makes a world of difference. It's hard to find opportunities to mentor, but they're out there, and just reaching out to young people in need and finding ways to be there for them. That's the way to go.
If I can add to what you said about it being hard to find opportunities to mentor, respectfully, I want to just share to everyone, hey, listen, it's easier than you think if you just look right in your own home. Charity starts at home. Involvement in your kids' schools and communities. You'll be surprised. I attend, as a support to the Atlanta District 5 School Board as a physical sponsor. I sit in a lot of school board meetings where it's very vacant of parents, a lot of stakeholders and other community members. We have to understand, and I think even what this conversation does from a corporate community partnership to schools, it takes much more than that parent alone. So I echo your sentiments, Dr. Rios, about reaching across the aisle or across the tracks, if you will, to mentor in a neighborhood that's maybe unlike your neighborhood, or it could be like the one you grew up in and left and didn't go back to, quite honestly. And I think when we say, hey, it's hard to find mentorship, I'll just give you one resource, guys. If you're looking for a way to get involved, volunteermatch.com. It's I kind of call it the Tinder for like volunteers, but truly, it links volunteers. We use it for righting our wrongs, and some of our most committed volunteers are people that say, hey, and it's a lifestyle for them. So now it's someone who is serious about the commitment, because you understand kids need that consistency, like you said. But start right at home. Look at the kids in your neighborhood and start, instead of complaining about them hanging out, start asking them about how they're doing. What do they need? Don't complain about it. Participate in that. But Dr. Rios, we greatly appreciate your time. I am going to show the trailer from the push outs. I can't wait to check it out. Any final thoughts of words of encouragement that you want to share with the parents, educators, and all of our listeners who want to contribute to the solution?
There's a really good question on there for Dr. Rios from Nia
Walter. I have time for a question. Which one, Amanda?
It's what advice would you give to teachers, like you spoke about, that made a huge difference in your life, and how they can help right now? And also, I've seen a number of comments about athletic coaches. Same situation. Either they can make it or break it for these kids, and a lot of these kids are getting verbal negative cues from even their athletic coaches.
Yes. Well, shout out to Nia Walters. Thank you for your question. If you're a teacher, even deeper shout out to Ms. Walters there. Thank you for the work you do. Those teachers out there in the trenches, listen, you got a tough job and you're underpaid, underappreciated in our society. So thank you for the work you do. I think, the number one thing I do when I work with educators is I talk about our research on emotional support. There's 4 kinds of supports in the literature. I'll just cover 2 right now: informational support and emotional support. Informational support is when you're just giving information to the kid. This is how you get to college. This is how you do it. These are the deadlines. These are the applications. Good luck, right? Right now with remote learning, we're giving them a lot of information. You know, here's the curriculum, these are the deadlines. That's good and all. But kids that grow up and struggle, they actually, we found in one of our studies when we surveyed 1,800 high school kids, we found that the ones that grow up and struggle, the ones from lower economic backgrounds, they actually are requesting, demanding, craving, hankering for more emotional support. Emotional support goes like this: Hey, Victor, I believe in you. I knew you could do it. I know college is maybe not in the picture, but guess what? Just try it. Here's the information, but just know I'm here for you. So just even if it's through these platforms of remote learning, let them know once in a while. Just pause everything you're teaching them a lesson. Just pause it and say, "Hey, I believe in you. I got you. I got your back. I'm here for you. You know what? If you need me, I'll be around. I'll stick around. We'll chat. We could call, whatever you need. Because I know sometimes you don't have the right internet connection, but I'll find you. We could text. We could call. Finding creative ways. One of the things I've been teaching educators is how some teachers around the country are getting on TikTok and doing those silly dances, and
Like you and
then
your wife did. I saw
yes, you saw that one. So my wife and I
I
did
stopped
one.
you. I
Yeah,
stopped
that's
you, Dr.
great.
Rios.
Yes, so we did this silly dance. My wife is an educator. I'm an educator. We did this silly dance, but then we figured out a way to get TikTok to put up little banners that said, to our students, we believe in you. We will miss you. We care about you. Have a great summer. Right? We went to our students because that's what they're on instead of these platforms. Our students are logging into these platforms, Zoom, all the Google Classrooms. But guess what? They're logging into TikTok every single day. So we have to go to where the students are at and deliver positive emotional support messaging. So for teachers, that's the way to go. And of course, for coaches, right now it's a tough time. You might not even see your teammate to your team, or when you do, guess what? My grad student Charles and I wrote, and also my partner, my wife Rebecca, we wrote a paper, scholarly article on the way in which coaches actually help Black male athletes so much, right? Because they're giving them these life lessons in ways that their other teachers are not able to. So, all to say that he found, Charles, my student, found that for particularly Black male athletes, having a coach that was there to give them those life lessons was invaluable. It's what sent a lot of them off to college, not just their sportsmanship, but the lessons that the coaches taught them. So sometimes we become those parental figures, and that's okay. Be okay with being a role model. That's the role of an educator. So that's what I have for the teachers, just that emotional support. Even if you're being cheesy, like my teacher that was always in my business, or nowadays, like check out some of those teachers doing those silly TikTok dances. But if you're posting positive support messages on there, you know, that's another way to go. And I know some people are not comfortable with social media and connected. You don't even have to connect with the students; they'll find you anyway. But there's other ways to do it. You could actually film the video on TikTok, download it, and just put it on a YouTube or platform where you don't have to befriend everyone. There's so many creative ways to stay connected. But the point is that seek out ways to stay positively, emotionally connected with your students, and that helps to improve the system.
Awesome. Well, we're going to take a moment. I want to share your trailer so everyone
Okay.
can run out and watch the push outs. And then I'll also just share a little snippet as well. So you guys can learn more, not only about right our wrongs, but all of the amazing organizations that are out there empowering the voice of this generation.
When I was this little, I told myself, man, school is not for me. Why do I want to go to school if it's not helping my mom pay the bills? I remember going hungry. And I remember seeing my mom cry. She couldn't feed her kids. And I tell myself, man, I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to be poor. Once you go in, you have to be willing to die. That's what one of the OGs would always tell me. Guys, hey, today's a good day to die.
I realized that there's a lot of kids, they have potential, but does not come to the forefront.
Potential to do what?
Potential to graduate, potential for further education, most of them.
I just finished reading our next speaker's book, Punished, Policing the Lives of Black and Latino Boys. Ladies and gentlemen, award-winning Professor Victor Rios.
There's a survivor's guilt that I live with for having left my neighborhood and my family in Oakland. And the way I make up for it is to be there for the people, like the people I left behind.
My mom had an accident and she couldn't work anymore. So, I mean, as the oldest one, I had to start working. It's either this or that. So I choose to work because I need the money.
My dad, he got shot. And I think that's the reason why I messed up my grades so much, because I couldn't do nothing but just stress over. They kicked me out of school because, you know, my grades was too low.
I have a few friends that are locked up, you know, and like I see them, how they suffer, like how they struggle. I don't want that for me.
What's up, Nico?
By saying drop out, you're putting the blame on the individual. Push out, you say, wait a minute, system, what's going on here? What are we doing as a system to address this issue?
Good morning, brother. How you doing today?
Martin mentored me when I was in high school.
Who are the ones in honors classes? Is it you guys? Is it good for dumb? Come on, guys, talk to me. Is it good for dumb? Back here, talk to me.
He saved my life. He was one of those people that saved my life.
Man, we got too much yet. They're getting pushed out, not dropped out. They're getting pushed out the educational system.
This is a story of young people who have been left behind.
We were told, y'all not supposed to finish high school, that we were not supposed to make it. You gotta be a rebel sometimes, you know?
But it's also the story of America.
It's like, no, enough. You deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve to go out and get an education.
How many people are nervous? Raise your hand if you're nervous.
I just got a high level.
Here it is. Here's the truth. It's really just stepping into something that you're maybe afraid of.
You got it? It's not just about these kids redeeming themselves.
Hey, man, I can't do it. Walk 3 feet. That's it. Well, you have 3 feet, baby.
It's also about us redeeming ourselves. Turning around the system that has really set up a lot of these young people to fail.
One more, big dog, one more. You got it? Good job, brother. Good job, man. I got this shit.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. And then just to share a wrap up here of more ways that you can be involved. It's so important for us to share the stories and to hear what's being done in the community. So here's just a little more about righting our wrongs here, where you can learn more and see the kindness letters that our children are writing, not only to their peers, but writing to legislators. And so we highly value the support and the message. So see what we're doing in the community.
What's in our community? So we got like playgrounds, family love, games, music, stuff like that. That's what's up, bro. That's what's up.
So definitely shout out to all of the youth who have a voice and they're using their voice to be the change. And to you all, our community, and to you, Dr. Rios, for empowering the voice of not only youth, but the educators and community that want to see this change happen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. An honor to be here. Beautiful kindred spirits. Keep up the amazing work of bringing justice to the world.
Awesome. So, guys, look, this isn't the end. You know, this conversation is one that you have to take back to your homes and your community. I know Amanda and Kate are always ferociously taking notes so we can give you a resource guide after the fact. So, we're going to share the list of all of the books that Dr. Rio shared tonight, as well as links to his material and books on his website. I'll drop the link for his website so you can watch the TED Talk, but also order it. I challenge you to take him up on social justice literacy, starting within your own homes. Okay. So now's the time. And this is not the end of the conversation. Next week, we'll have a part 2 on the dialogue of education, urban education, and actually inviting youth to join us and share their perspectives on the dialogue of race and racism. And we'll wrap up our season 1 with 2 other episodes after that. Amanda or Kate, if you want to share about episodes 7 and 8 to wrap up the season.
Yeah, actually, so next weekend we are going to be back with part 2, so we're going to continue the conversation. I did see a comment that somebody asked about Betsy DeVoe. That could be a whole episode. Don't get me started there. So we will probably cover that then. Also, I was just going to say, I'm like addicted to documentaries. So Push Outs is I'm going to watch that. I watched and I pushed out Best of Enemies, which is a really interesting story on education. I watched Miss Virginia this week, highly educational too. And then today I meditated twice and I watched Teach Us All. About the Little Rock Nine and what's happening with education. I highly recommend Teach Us All. It's on Netflix. So much about education that I didn't realize. So next week is Education Part 2. The week after that, get your tissues ready. I'm going to look at Melissa. We are going to be talking to Christian Picciolini, the writer of Breaking Hate. He's a former white supremacist who has left the white power movement, and he's worked for the last 28 years getting other young men and women out of that movement. So he was one of the founders of the skinhead movement in Chicago. That's going to be tough. I can't even talk about it right now without crying. Again, between Dr. Batalora, Dr. Rios, and Christian Picciolini, I don't know what we've done to be so blessed, but oh my gosh. And then we are only scheduled for 8 shows before we take a break. And then we'll see what the demand is there to continue on. But the last show will be about inequality in housing. We are from the multifamily industry, so we figured we probably should talk about what we did. Since we've taken on all the topics we don't know anything about, we're finally going to talk about what we do know about. But that's our plan for shows 6, 7, and 8. And then we'll reevaluate and see if we're going to continue on. But what a great night. Kate, we left Kate out, but Kate had surgery today. And
don't talk about it. Don't bring it up. So I do want to say to Dr. Rios that I reached out to, I have a few cousins who are teachers, and one in particular, I reached out to her and I said, do you have any questions for Dr. Rios? What should I ask him? And she said that she had heard you speak in Rochester, New York. She had brought her sons with her. And she said, just let them talk. Just
Aw.
give them the time to talk. Just let them tell the stories. And I want
shout out to your cousin. Thank you for being there in Rochester. That was a beautiful, beautiful moment for myself. A beautiful local artist from Rochester presented me with a portrait of me that she sketched out that day in Rochester, and that community is beautiful. So shout out to your cousin and her kids too.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to everybody who's watching. We appreciate you. Today's episode and next week's episode came because you all tell us that this was a hot topic. And so we reached out to Dr. Rios to kick it off. And I'm so glad we did. I'm eternally grateful. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for tuning in to Color Outside the Lines. We'll see you next week.
Good night, everyone.